where you can do all those things and so much more. Just grab a seat in the chair or the floor. Sit back, relax, recline, while she drops another casual line. You're tuned into Casually Molly with Molly and Bergie.
Welcome back to the Casually Molly podcast. I am your host, Molly Ambergy. We always interview all comedians, artists, entertainers, you name it. And today I am very excited to welcome, he is a very accomplished comedian. Give it up for Myq Kaplan. And the crowd goes wild. Hello, Myq.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, crowd. Thank you. Please. That's too much.
I love it. Myq, where are you actually joining from us right now? Like, where are you at?
I live in Brooklyn, New York, and that is where I am.
Nice. I actually love Brooklyn. The last time I was in New York, my friend lived in Brooklyn, and so I was able to be around there. So speaking of Brooklyn, what's a good highlight spot that our listeners should know about from your home area?
Oh, I live right near Prospect Park, and for a city, like New York City, I think it's real valuable to spend time looking at trees sometimes. So when the weather is encouraging, or even when it's not, I like to walk in that park. So if you live in New York, or if you come to New York, come to New York, walk in a park.
Right. Absolutely. We can relate to that here. As everybody knows who is a fan of the podcast, we are based here in St. Louis, Missouri. We've got Forest Park, which is like the big place to go. But I am right there with you. I live near a park as well. So it's so nice to be able to kind of take in the trees and, in the midst of all the chaos and everything going on. I did want to highlight, though, you are coming to our city of St. Louis, Missouri at the Gaslight Theatre this Friday, July 16th. Why don't you tell us a little bit? I know our mutual friend Yael Hollander kind of got you into the show here at the Gaslight. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that process?
Sure. It was a fortuitous sort of chain of events that the past year I haven't been touring much at all, and I'll tell you why. It wasn't healthy or safe to do that.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know if you were paying attention to the news, but the first show that I booked on the road to return was actually like months ago, before even I was like vaccinated. And I was like, well, I guess hopefully as things move forward optimistically, safely, healthily. So it was sort of like this aspirational, I don't know, just like throwing a football like real far and being like, I hope somebody's there. I hope I'm there to catch it,
Right, yeah.
But so I got some shows booked in Kansas City at the Comedy Club of Kansas City. And I was like, okay, well, I'll be there in July. And then I also booked, once everything became clear that it was going to be happening, I booked some shows at Acme in Minneapolis for the following week, which led to the sort of the unofficial name of the tour, which is the Coffee Table Tour, or the picking up the coffee table that belongs to my girlfriend's late grandmother that she would like because she loves her grandmother and loves this coffee table. That's like too long for the poster, but that is that's the unofficial name of the tour. So here's the thing is, normally I would probably fly to Minneapolis, fly to Kansas City from New York, but to get this coffee table, we're like, well, let's take a road trip. So my girlfriend and I are leaving this Wednesday, and it would have been fine to just drive, and stop some places along the way. But I was like, well, let's see if I can book some gigs, reasonable drive between here and the Midwest. And so I reached out to some comedian friends in the various cities along the way, and Yale had for the past, I don't actually know even how long, it seems like forever, but we've been Facebook friends, and I've been doing over the past year a bunch of live streams like this, a lot of them on my own and with a good friend of mine, Liz Glazer. And so like every Wednesday, Liz and I would be doing these chats and just talking about what's been going on, what's coming up. and Yale's been such a sort of a stalwart, supporter, like there, even when if he's not there, he's like, I'm sorry, I can't be there. And like, it's very important for you to apologize for not tuning into a live stream when, it's my mother would say that my grandfather would always say that a repeated favor becomes an obligation. And so I'm like, it's like when it sort of is a favor that whenever anybody watches your stuff or buys your things or comes to your shows, it's like they don't have to, they're not obligated. But like once you do it a couple times, like we've established a pattern. I'm like, where is Yale? Where did he go? So
where is he?
So he's always been there. So it feels that way. And I was like, yeah, so I'm trying to do some shows along the way to Kansas City. And Yale was like, oh, I know some people who might be able to help you book a show in St. Louis. And he put me in touch with somebody, and it didn't really work out. And I was like, Yale, do you know anybody else who might help me be able to book a show in? And he's like, oh, like I could do it also. It's like the old, the old joke, like somebody calls a law firm and they're like, Schwartz and Schwartz here. Like, okay, is Schwartz there? He's out of the office. Oh, is Schwartz there? Oh, she's playing golf. Is Schwartz there? They're actually in the bathroom. Is Schwartz there speaking? And I'm like, Yale, why didn't you
do it in the first place? Yeah.
Yale's like, oh, please, I couldn't do that unless you want me to. Then I definitely could. So so Yale set it up at the Gaslight, and it was smooth, and I mean, it hasn't happened yet, but I'm optimistic.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I didn't mean to jump on your punchline there. It's exactly, I'm so happy that Yale is doing this just because we're so happy to have you come to the city of St. Louis. You can see Myq Kaplan at the Gaslight this Friday, July 16th at 8:00. I have been very familiar, like I told Myq, with the Gaslight. It's a staple here in St. Louis and the Central West End area. And you can get tickets on Ticketmaster.com, or an hour before the show starts, the box office opens. So shout out to Amy Page. She and I have a good relationship as well. We've been friends for years. But yeah, come support this show. It's a great, cute 90-seat theater. It's adorable. Again, St. Louis staple. But speaking of staples, you seem to be, from what I see on your website, which, to compliment you, sometimes you'll go to people's websites just to kind of find out about them, Wikipedia pages, but don't worry, I still went to your website. But I was like, Myq is definitely important if he's got a Wikipedia page for sure. So, but what I loved about you on your About section, it was like, Myq Kaplan is a comedian named Myq Kaplan. And I was like, that's very straightforward. But you seem to be a staple on the Tonight Show scene here. You even have Conan as a credit. How do you feel now that Conan is quote unquote retiring, having that be a part of your resume?
Well, it's even more so. Thank you for asking. Thank you for visiting my website. Thank you for doing all of the research that you have. It is funny that I was actually, so I will answer your question eventually. I hope that you have planned several hours longer than normal for this show, or that you're okay not getting to all of your questions. This will be the last one I answer because it will take an hour. A week or two ago, I was on a show with actually a buddy named Graham Kay, who's a comedian who actually just did The Tonight Show. And he said he got to do The Tonight Show the night that he did because a rapper who was supposed to be on got into legal trouble and couldn't make it. And so
Okay.
I'd never heard of that rapper. The rapper's name was Pooh Shiesty. And so I looked up, and I am a big hip hop fan, and I was like, oh, I haven't heard of this rapper. And I Googled, before I went on right after Graham, I looked up Pooh Shiesty, and I found his Wikipedia page, and it actually had a subsection called Legal Troubles. And actually it didn't list the one that Graham had named. So I was like, I wonder if that guy was just wanted to call in sick to the Tonight Show, but was just like, I don't know what I'm going to do. So let's just call in, murder. And the point of this story is mainly to share that I had never heard of this person, yet he had a Wikipedia page, which is such a strange thing to be like, wow, somebody, they really must be, they are accomplished, they know what they're doing, they've done so much. You can't like, I mean, you could start your own Wikipedia page, but I think people they might take it down. I don't know how it works exactly. And in fact, I think you're not even allowed to make your own. The way that I got mine was after I did Last Comic Standing in 2010, somebody reached out to me and was like, you don't have a Wikipedia page. Do you want a Wikipedia page? Like, and I was like, I mean, sure. He's like, yeah, I kind of work with Wikipedia. So the point is, there are people who are maybe like watching and or listening to me right now that are like, I don't know who you are, but oh, you have a Wikipedia. Like there's some, and Wikipedia has like a lot of made up stuff on it. It's sort of like the vibe that people get from Wikipedia. And also, here's what I want to say is that I think most of the stuff on Wikipedia is not made up. I think they do a great job, a great service. They're not a sponsor, but like donate to Wikipedia. Keep them going in business. Support them, as well as, I like that you said, support the show. In addition to, if you come to the show on Friday or any of the shows that I'm doing on this tour, it'll be great to support businesses, to support me as a comedian. Also, you will get something out of it in that the show will be enjoyable to you. You will laugh at the show. You will come away with good feelings and memories. Anyway, the point is, to answer your question, here's how I feel about Conan. Conan was actually the first late night show that I got to be on before he was on TBS, when he had The Tonight Show. The Tonight Show with Conan O'Brien was my first late night credit. And at the time, I mean, it was just super exciting to get to do it. It was December of 2009. I'd done one other TV spot on Comedy Central the year before, but this was like my first, network TV. Like it felt like this real legitimacy. And I had just sort of become a full-time, like, professional comedian, and this like allowed me to also go places like and be booked where people didn't know who I was at the time. Even though like, oh wow, this comedian's been on The Tonight Show. Who? What is he? What is it? But like, oh, The Tonight Show. Like, I've got a lot of credits. The Tonight Show, Wikipedia, like at least those two. And I mean, I think Wikipedia has an even wider reach than The Tonight Show these days. But the point is, I didn't know how rare that credit would be, how like meaningful. I mean, I was just excited to get to be on the show. I loved Conan. I still love Conan. Mm-hmm. And then the fact that his run on The Tonight Show was such a limited window, it became, it's like a collector's edition. I don't know if there's any way that I can, I don't think there's any way that I can sell my Tonight Show experience, but I mean, maybe as an NFT, who knows these days, but
right. Yeah.
I've only started learning what these things are, but the point is, I've been saying the point is, there's a lot of points. It's like, at least, maybe like a Jewish star, so there's many, many points, maybe even more than that, like overlaid. But I mean, I love Conan. I wish him the best. I got to be on his TBS show numerous times after that. And every time, a thrill. One time I was on, Weird Al was also a guest, and I got to meet Weird Al. And what a nice man that guy is as well. Cool. And just, getting to do, I mean, stand-up is what I love doing, and getting to do it on a show that really like cares about comedy and supports stand-ups and like that. I mean, he's been doing a nightly show for, it seems like, I mean, decades. Yeah,
right.
And he deserves a break. He deserves a rest. He deserves whatever he wants and needs. And I believe he is still going to be doing a show eventually, like a weekly show. So he's not. I'm here, Myq Kaplan, here to report that Conan O'Brien is not done yet. Everyone, he's. I think we haven't heard the last of old Conan. Old Conan O'Brien still got a few tricks up his sleeve, or maybe right out. Maybe he's going sleeveless. I don't know what's happening on the new HBO Max Conan show, but you didn't ask. The point is, love Conan. Love that I got to do his show. Very grateful for all the support that it, helped sort of launch me to be able to tell people to come see me. I mean, now I think here's my top 3 credits is The Tonight Show with Conan, Wikipedia, and the Casually Molly podcast. So please, everyone, thank you for supporting all these fine institutions.
Oh, I love that. that. Oh my God, Myq. I feel like, and I am somebody who has a color-coded planner, so I love that there's a bunch of points. So I appreciate the organization, and I always I was a theater major, so I like the exposition and the background of events, which leading into background of events, you have a very accomplished resume. And I'm not saying that just because we're on this podcast to make it your top 3 credit, not trying to butter you up. But what I always like to ask people, obviously you're in a great place in your career right now. People probably recognize you on the street. What I kind of always want to know, when did you know stand-up comedy was going to be the career that you were going to pursue? Like, did you have like a moment in time, like a certain show or just like a certain open mic, or did you see somebody that you liked perform? Where did it all begin for you?
Thank you for asking, Molly. I'm glad to share this answer with you. Whenever I have conversations with people, for interviews, for podcasts, or just in general, people want to know, like, sometimes I tell like similar stories and I want to make them I want it to be fresh. I want it to be like, not just like, here is what I always say, you have asked this question and I will output this answer. And so I want to say, first of all, everything that I've said so far to answer your question has been brand new. This is a Casually Molly exclusive right now.
Yes.
Never been said or done before. I've never said this is a Casually Molly exclusive before on any other show that I've ever done, not even Conan or Wikipedia. But it might go there. That would be, what if Wikipedia were a Casually Molly exclusive? That would be a nice sketch.
Done.
So sincerely, the truth of my experience is that I was a musician before I was a comedian. My parents were music teachers, so I played violin since I was 4, taught myself guitar in high school, started writing songs. Some of them were funny on purpose. Some of them were funny accidentally. And I remember I was performing like at my summer camp, at talent shows, when I got to college, we had a coffee house on campus. And then I started reaching out to places around the Boston area where I was in school. When I turned 21, I started like calling all these, calling all bars. And I was like, bars, anyone bars? Would you like me to play my bars in your bars? And I remember the Comedy Studio was the first comedy club that came up in my search. I was sort of just like, it was pre-Google. I was just searching for Asking Jeeves, I guess, or
yes.
I think there was a website called Hotbot, or maybe Yahoo was around, but I was like searching, and I was like, clubs, Boston. And one of them that popped up, I was looking for like music venues, but one that popped up was the Comedy Studio, which has moved around, has moved recently, but is still in existence more than 20 years later. And I called the number, and the owner, Rick Jenkins, answered, and I was like, "Can I come to your place to perform? I have funny songs. Like, I'm not doing stand-up comedy, but and he's like, "Sure, you can have 5 minutes." And I was like, "That's not a ton of time for like some music open mics. You would get like 15 minutes or 3 songs but I was like, okay, I'll like condense it as much as I can, do a couple real short ones. And in between the songs and before the songs, so this is my first time on stage at a comedy club. Like, they didn't have an open mic at the time. It was just like a real showcase show. I went on right after Jonathan Katz, who, I don't know if you're familiar, he used to have the Squiggle Vision cartoon, Dr. Katz, Professional Therapist, which I had loved. And I think it either was on at the time or had just gone off the air. Mm-hmm. And Jonathan Katz went on right before me, and he concluded with a song. He had like a brief, funny song. And then I go on to play my funny songs, having never been on stage at a comedy club before. And so I sort of expressed that in a way. I'm like, the most famous person in this room just did what I'm about to do that I've never done. And so here's mine. And I remember that was like endearingly, I feel like, anxious in a way that like the audience at the Comedy Studio is always so warm and welcoming. And so I did that. I said those things. I played a song. I talked a little bit more before my second song, and people laughed at the things that I said. And that was a thing like that I wasn't setting out to do. Like I hadn't gone there to tell jokes. I hadn't gone there to like do stand-up comedy, but in the middle, of like, I would later come to call this like, riffing, ad-libbing, being in the moment. And at the time, though, I called it like talking until they stopped laughing and then playing the second song. And I really loved, I love playing music. I love sharing music. Music is such a beautiful, I don't know if you are, if you're familiar with music, but it's really good. You should, for all your listeners, all your audience, please check out music.
I'm going to do that today after this podcast. You're opening me to a whole new world, Myq. Thank you.
So I love, like, music is such a large, like, meaningful, almost religious experience. And maybe even religious. Like, my mom, for me, like, growing up, we were culturally Jewish, and I like went to temple and I got a bar mitzvah, but I wasn't required to do that. It wasn't like you have to. It was sort of like a choice. That I was like nudged along, but like music wasn't a choice. My mom was like, you must play. You have a choice about like what faith tradition you might want to follow. Like, who knows what exists in the world? Who knows what exists beyond this life? But music exists, and you will create it. And she just wanted me to love it. And so like the same way that, maybe some kids are made to go to like religious school, Sunday school, church, temple, mosque, whatever it might be. I was like that, but my temple was music school. And so I love music. And also now, so that's what I went to the comedy studio to do, my music. But in between, it was just this brand new discovery that I didn't even need to play the guitar to get this reaction from the crowd. And so the answer to the question that you asked is kind of like the question of, when did I know that I wanted to do comedy, like, for a living, that was the thing? Like, kind of, it was right after I started doing comedy. It was, how did you know you wanted to do it? Well, I was doing it. And then I was like, oh, I didn't even know I was doing it, but this is what I want to do. It was actually like a period of between, like, that was probably late 1999, I think, because I graduated college in 2000. So the first time I performed at the Comedy Studio, I was in my senior year of college. And between late 99 and like 2002, I was sort of in a nebulous like limbo between comedy and music, still pursuing music, but like being pulled by comedy till eventually I was like, I found other places to perform comedy. And so that's why I would say that 2002, I went to, it's funny, the comedy studio was like, I feel like it's almost like it could be called like the comedy womb. It's just so warm and an embrace of the audience and the comedians. And eventually when one starts doing comedy at open mics where people aren't there to see you necessarily, it might just be other comedians or people at the bar who didn't even know there was going to be a show, or people there to see their friends but not you, like all different circumstances. But I was like, oh wow, I could go to that bar and this venue and this basement and this attic and this Chinese restaurant, and people will just let me go on stage and say the things and or sing the songs that I want to do. And so it was sort of like, often a person's first comedy experience is like, cathartic or engaging or like just, beautiful and, goes so well. And then, your next 1,000, you're like, oh God, I wish it was like that first one again. So it was kind of, once I started, going to open mics and realizing that I was like, I have a funny song, like a 1-minute song that I can end this set with. And the first 4 minutes are, hoo boy, what's going to happen? I don't even know. But like that excitement that I knew that something was possible. So it was, I guess it was sort of like, like there are many points on the stars of this conversation that we're having. There were many points at which I like experienced the sort of the desire to continue to experience those like communions, those sort of like mini experiences of communion, of telling a joke and having the audience laugh, of thinking of something, saying something, and having people connect with it and laugh at it, if that is the desire, which it often is. And
Good.
yeah,
Absolutely. July 16th, everybody. Get that out. You can connect with Myq Kaplan at the Gaslight Theater. Not to interrupt. Go ahead.
No,
Just a quick promo.
That was a beautiful button. That was actually going to be my conclusion as well. So come connect. We're a good team. So
we're a great team. This is great.
Yeah. If you're there on the 16th, please feel free at any point that it seems like an appropriate, meaningful time, just to yell out like a hype person, like July 16th. Just punctuate like a get her done kind of, and that's the end of that joke. July 16th.
Yes, I love it. No, I'm so excited for you. What I wanted to hit on as well, though, was that, you're talking about all these peaks and different points and everything, but I'm sure you really hit one. Don't you have an Amazon special as well? Yes. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? That's awesome.
Sure. I appreciate it. All of your questions are nice. So thank you for these. I don't know if, the different kinds of journalism that I'm familiar with, I don't know if you consider yourself a journalist, but there's, investigative journalists, there's gotcha journalists, there's gonzo, there's like hard hitting. And I feel like, you're here like setting up some nice softballs for me to just knock out of the park and into the gaslight. Okay, the point is, that one just doesn't even make any sense. But it had the sound of it, like what do you want? Confident nonsense or non-confident sense? Can it be neither? Okay, so I'll back up a little from the question that you asked to say. So I started really pursuing comedy in 2002 in Boston. 2008, I moved to New York, and that was when I started really being able to do comedy as my livelihood without doing other things, like starting to travel, to perform headline at colleges and starting then at some clubs. And I released my first album, which was called Vegan Mind Meld I think I recorded 2009 and it came out in 2010. And then, and that's sort of like a first album is like sort of the sum total of, I'd been doing it 8 years at that point. And I was like, it's funny, like sometimes for a band, they put out their best of, 50 years later, 30 years later, like, wow, the best of their entire career. For a comedian, I feel like the first album is like a best of like the last decade. It's like, what are the best jokes that I did tell and do tell and can tell? And so then I released that. And then over the next several years, my goal was to, create another hour of best jokes. It took 8 years the first time. Like, how long is it going to take the second time? And so I think I recorded my second album like 3 years after the first one. So like I got the time down a little bit. And at the same time, when that first album came out, I got to do a half-hour special on Comedy Central. And I was very grateful to do that. And then my goal became to do, like, at the time, it was sort of like, pre-Netflix specials, it was like, there were maybe HBO, you could have a comedy special, but that was like a very special thing, it seemed like. Showtime, there were places where you could have specials, but it seemed like it wasn't as common for, like, today people are, like, some very, established, hilarious, successful comedians are releasing their specials on YouTube, or direct to, like, just all different platforms now, which is wonderful. I'm glad that everybody has the capacity. At the time, it seemed like the path was like, I was like, Comedy Central, hour special after doing a Comedy Central half hour. So that was my desire. And the second album that I made called Meet Robot was actually produced by Comedy Central Records. And so we recorded this album. And then I was like, and so what if it was also an hour special? And they were like, maybe. And so they did not produce it as an hour special, but a company that at the time was called New Wave and now is called Comedy Dynamic, they listened to, my manager at the time who is still my manager at all times. His management goes all the way back to the Big Bang and all the way forward to the heat death of the universe. Love him. And my management company helped like connect me with this production company that they were like, we'll shoot, we'll produce, this hour or an hour for you. It actually turned out to be a separate hour that we called Small, Dork, and Handsome. And after we shot it, it actually went to Netflix first. It was before Netflix was producing their own comedy specials. So they were purchasing, from other ones that people had made. And so I was super, at the time, it's such a strange thing now, because I know what I know now, having lived longer and experienced the passage of time and learning things. I don't know if that's something that you experienced, that as you live longer, you know some more things about your own experience and perhaps the world around you. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
crazy, right? Yeah, learning. Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're not in school anymore, so you don't have to. But if you do,
if it happens,
yeah, I welcome it. Yeah, if learning happens, I'm okay. I'm okay with it. I'm a fan. I'm a fan of it. I'm a learning head, if you will. I like learning going in my head, and also the heart. I'm a learning heart, if you will. I'm a learning head at heart, I guess I would say, and a learning heart at head. So that didn't come out exactly the way I meant, but sometimes you got to say things and then be like, oh, I didn't mean to say that. How are you going to say you didn't mean to say something if you don't say something? So sometimes just say something, and sometimes don't. So I've been thinking about going on silent retreats, but I'm at the thinking stage. I've been talking about thinking about going on silent retreats. That's where I'm at. But people who come back from them, they will not shut up about them. So I don't know if it's working. But the point is, maybe it is. They're like, oh boy, that's too much silence. Gotta get it back out. So there we are, around 2013, 14 or so. We recorded the new wave / comedy dynamic, helped shot the special. It was a super fun thing to do. And then the goal was, the initial hope was to sell it to Comedy Central and be like, will you buy this? And they did not, but they were like, we did sell it to Netflix, which at the time had, I think, barely, they'd started streaming a little earlier, but they weren't the force at the time that they have become. Where like now the idea of like a Netflix special is, that could be like the gold standard, the desire to be like, because if something's on Comedy Central, still wonderful. Love them. Yes. And would be happy for anyone to be able to see my comedy anywhere, including there. But when a special's on Comedy Central, like it usually airs, once or a couple times, and it's not necessarily available at all times of day like it is on a Netflix streaming platform. Like, like my mom still watches TV shows that are like, she DVRs them, but she's like, this show's on Tuesday, this show's on Thursday. Like, when is it on? I'm like, if it's on Netflix, like it is on always. It is on at all times. So it actually turned out that what could have been my second choice at the time was like, my dad listened to Garth Brooks when I was growing up, and there's a specific song that I remember called Unanswered Prayers, I think. It's the chorus is like, sometimes I thank God for unanswered prayers. And it's one of the things that it's about is that like in high school, he prayed for a life with his high school girlfriend, and he didn't get that. But then he did get to marry a person that when he was an adult he met and was like, oh yeah, this is better. My adult brain self knows a little more of what so he's like, thank God God didn't answer. Thank God God didn't answer that first prayer of being like, that would be like, the evil genie granting your wish and be like, okay, you want to be with your high school girlfriend that you're not as compatible with over the years because fair enough. Okay, well, thank you, God. So I am thankful that everything happened the way that it did, that the special got to be on Netflix for 3 years. And then I believe once they did start producing all of their own specials, the contract that we had with them ended. And so then the company that was in charge sold it, or the rights to it, to Amazon. So now it is on Amazon at all times. And I mean, ultimately, I feel like Amazon is in all of us always. It is this, this looming, lurking, ever growing, like, in a way that's probably destroying the literal Amazon, but, at the, it is there. So I'm like, yeah, don't, shop small, shop at mom and pop shops. Feel free to, I mean, I'm like, don't support Amazon in ways that you don't want to. That try to buy local, artisanal. Try to get organic, free range. But this comedy special is there as well. So.
Any platform, and especially if you want to support local, come see Myq Kaplan at the Gaslight Theatre, July 16th at 8 o'clock, local theater. You've got some great talent coming in. But speaking of all platforms, you're leading me right into my next question. You have a couple of podcasts. Why don't we talk a little bit about those? Because we can find those on a lot of streaming platforms, as this podcast is also available as well. But why don't you talk a little bit about that and what each one is about for people who are newly listening in and are maybe like, oh, he's got a couple of podcasts. What are they about? Where can I find them?
It's true. Thank you for asking. So my first podcast that I want to talk about is called the Casually Molly Podcast. I've taken over it, and so I'm your new Molly. Thank you. That just to be clear, everyone, I am a comedian, and that is a joke. I have not taken over this podcast. I'm only here today. I'd be happy to return, but this is Molly's podcast. So the two that I have that come out regularly. One is called Broccoli and Ice Cream, and that I've been doing for several years. We just reached our 200th episode. I'm real excited to get to keep doing it. I basically have conversations with friends, often comedians. I know I have a lot of comedian friends on. I've also had on a couple of politicians recently, including one that may be the new mayor of New York coming forward, the Eric Adams, who just, I think, came out ahead in the Democratic primary. But so mostly artists, comedians, musicians, writers, some activists, and I talk to people about the work of their life and the joys of their life, and that is why I call it Broccoli and Ice Cream, because to some people, eating broccoli is work and eating ice cream is joy. For other people, it might be reversed, and for some people, it might be intertwined. Perhaps you enjoy broccoli-flavored ice cream or ice cream-textured broccoli. And so that's Broccoli and Ice Cream. One episode comes out for free every week, and then one comes out on my Patreon. So, much like a drug dealer, you get part of it. You get the setup for free, and you have to pay for the punchline. I guess that's a comedian, not a drug dealer. So, and then my other podcast is called The Faucet, and on that one I have 0 guests, usually. It is just me spouting off a faucet. So it's sort of, I don't know if you can imagine, it's sort of like this if you weren't here. If I ask myself questions and then answer them and just sort of, do some word dancing, and it comes out, I aim to have it come out at least once a week, sometimes more on the tour that I'm going on. I think my goal is to try to do at least, an episode from either every city I go or about every show that happens, because there's going to be some new fun happening, and I want to share it with everyone. So yeah, Broccoli and Ice Cream and The Faucet are my 2 podcasts. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I definitely want to dive into listening to them more. I've listened to a few episodes on each. I wanted to touch on, we do interview comedians with multiple podcasts, just like how you were talking about. For the preparation, though, I'm always interested because obviously I do comedy, but I always have a guest on. So I always have somebody to talk to and relate to. What I'm wondering is, though, how is it the preparation maybe different, or is it the same preparing for a guest versus preparing to have just yourself entertaining? I guess, too, like, with the pandemic, there's been a lot of people who have done comedy specials in their houses and things like that as well, or via stream. So maybe it's not a very foreign choice per se, but I just want to know, like, what goes through your head preparing for just yourself versus for preparing with a guest?
Sure. Another great question. Another banger from Casually Molly's Molly.
This is journalism, casual journalism right here. Go ahead.
Ooh, another kind of journalism to add to my list. I could get behind that. So the reason the Faucet began is during the initial months of the pandemic, the lockdown, I did a number of shows I was doing a bunch of online shows that were, sometimes called stand-up shows, but are not the exact same thing as doing stand-up live in a room with people, though some organizations did foster like an environment that was as close to that as possible. And one of those was the Nowhere Comedy Club, where I did a show. So the pandemic began March of last year, and I had a new album scheduled to come out in May of last year. I had been planning to go to do like album release shows and to tour in support of that. I was gonna, go to lots of different places around the country, and then that became a thing that was not possible. And so I had between March and May a lot of time to do a lot of podcasts, a lot of streaming, a lot of conversations, a lot of interviews, a lot of talking like this, a lot of, So I remember, what is it? This is gonna be great when I remember the point here. Oh yeah, so the show that I did a show on May 8th of 2020, which was the day of my girlfriend's birthday, and it was the day that the album came out. So the album's birthday and my girlfriend's birthday. The album, AKA Born on the 8th of May. And so I wanted, instead of being able to tour to support that, I did this, an online album release show where I did like also an hour of comedy that was different than the album. And there was a lot of in the moment, sort of what I would have called in the beginning of my career, talking until people stop laughing and then playing a song, but without the songs. So, or there might have been some songs, but after that hour that was at the Nowhere Comedy Club, where they did such a good job of, curating this environment for the audience to understand what was going on and for comedians to have a good time, doing comedy from their home to an audience full of people that were as audible as possible, sort of. They like trained people to be like, if there's sounds, turn off your sound. If if a dog barks, if something happens, but there was like a front row experience where they're like, if you're there, like you're as close to a real life audience as possible. And so that show was just so compared to like all the other Zoom comedy shows that I'd been doing, where like I really was grateful to do all of them, but some of them were like, is this a stand-up show? Is this a podcast? Is it a strange art performance piece? Is it what is this? This one was also, all of those things. It was like stand-up, it was like performance art, it was like a podcast. And afterwards, my girlfriend Rini said to me, she's like, I feel like you could just do that, like you could just talk for an hour whenever you want, and that could be a new podcast. And I believe she also she's like, you're like a faucet, of ideas, of words, of thoughts. And so that, I was like, that you're right. You are right about me, my beloved girlfriend, Rini. And so I set up the podcast, and I just started doing it on a regular basis during the lockdown, and now, and all regular and irregular. Like I would do it every Saturday at a specific time that people could watch, and then also different times throughout the week, just whenever I felt like it. And so now that I have a schedule forming and returning, the schedule of the lockdown is something that is sort of dropping away, and I'm like, figuring out like, oh, when will I do this thing? But to answer your question, which is how does the preparation prepare? How does the preparation compare between having a guest, not having a guest? Whenever I was doing the premise of the Faucet is that I would just start talking and go for as long as I wanted, as long as the Zoom meeting would go. As sometimes it would be 40 minutes, sometimes it would be 10 minutes. And sometimes like earlier in the day or right before, I would like not sit down to plan what I was going to talk about, but a thing would occur to me and be like, oh, I'll talk about that thing. If a thing happened in the world, in my life, in social media, sometimes I'd be like, oh, since the last one, here's what's been going on. Here's what I did last night. Here's what I did earlier. Here's what happened yesterday. And then being open to, in the moment, like whatever experience arose, which is part of what I like to do in comedy as well. Like you didn't ask this, but I'll bonus answer.
Okay.
When I do stand-up, like there's sort of a spectrum of experience that happens. Like the shows that I'll be doing on this tour are going to be specifically like a show that I have written and honed and prepared, and it's still sort of in the process of like figuring out exactly what goes where. But I'm also always open to whatever might arise. Like if a new thought occurs to me, like, oh, this could be a new component of this joke in the moment. That's one of my favorite things. And so sometimes when I'm performing, I have like a set list of ideas that I'm like, these are the ones that I want to get to. But if I never get to any of them because extra spontaneous fun happened, like that is a joy. So that is sort of the way that the Faucet, even I feel like I have even less pressure, even like the stakes are even lower because I'm not promising a stand-up show. I'm not promising like necessarily jokes with punchlines the same way that, before you and I began recording this, you wanted me to be assured that like I'm not here to perform. I'm not here to, put on a particular, honed, crafted show. We're having a conversation like of what arises in the moment. And there might be like, oh, you ask a question that I've answered before. And I'm like, oh, there might be components of that's of stories that I've told, of bits of the truth of my life that will be the same from conversation to conversation, from interview to interview, from podcast to podcast. But the goal of the Faucet is to actually discover new things or to share new things, so there's almost kind of no way to prepare for that, I'm realizing now, because I sometimes will. Like sometimes I would do episodes where like if I had a fun exchange with like a fan online, like there was one particular one I'm remembering where I tweeted something about, I was like, oh, do people who love deep dish pizza know about lasagna? And I know that they're different, but I thought that was a funny thing to say. But I had a guy wrote back and he was like very passionately pro deep dish pizza and very definitively wanted me to be aware that they are different things. And we had a communication back and forth that became like, he became a friend. It became this beautiful, so there's a couple, I think at least one or two Faucet episodes about like, it either has deep dish or lasagna or, calzones or something in the title that indicates, it might be like the deep dish saga or something. And as such, like, so sometimes a thing happens that like I know that I'm gonna share because I'm like, I just want to share this, this beautiful moment that occurred in my life with people, and then whatever else happens. But sometimes it is just legitimately, I start recording and I start talking like, hello, and here's what's going on in my brain right now, compared to broccoli and ice cream when I'm having a conversation where my goal is to not do all of the talking. My goal is to encourage my guests to do more of the talking. So I guess the two ways that I prepare, one is that I have specific questions that I like asking, especially of comedians, artists, but kind of everyone. And one of the questions is just like, what was like the earliest art that you created? What were you doing as a child? And potentially, how did that lead you to where you are now? And how do you do what you're doing now? And so there's sort of like a number of specific questions, and that would be for like the work aspect of things. And for the joy aspect of things, I ask people, when you're not working, like what are the things that you do that bring joy, peace, and calm in your life, or help you feel the way that you want to feel when you are not working, and also when you are working. And then those are sort of like the launch pads for where the conversation goes. Like, so I don't have like, a list of questions that I must ask. Again, like with a stand-up set list, like if I never get to my questions, like sometimes I find myself at the end of a conversation, we've been talking 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, and I'm like, oh, here's the question that I normally ask first. But the conversation, organically grew into what it was based on who that person was. Like some people, I feel like are the vibe is it's more meaningful and valuable for me to ask a question and they answer it, and then I'll ask another question. And then, but if I was like, let me ask you this, and they're like, let me tell you this first, I'm like, tell me as much as possible. And in fact, I recently this year had both my mom and my dad on my podcast separately.
Oh, wow.
And so those conversations were some of the ones where I feel like I almost didn't have to do anything. I was just like, what about this? And then they talk for 15 minutes, what about this? And then another 15 minutes, like, oh, I guess the show is over. Like that's, that is where I come from. And so that is, how I am and how I do. So, like born of these two faucets. And, and so that's the first way, that I would say I prepare is to just have some specific questions that have always led everyone down a different path of depending on what their answers are, depending on, if it's dance, then the next question is different. If it's, drawing, the next question is different. And it sort of becomes like a choose your own adventure where I don't even have, any of the pages written yet because the other person is going to be mostly the source of the book. And the second way that I would say I prepare is if it's a friend, if it's somebody that I've known a long time, then I probably don't do much preparation at all. I'm just like, we know each other. You're a comedian. You're my friend. Let's talk. If it's somebody that I've never met, or if it's somebody that I don't know as well, then I'll certainly, as you might, I imagine, go to their website, look them up on Wikipedia.
Yeah.
See what projects they manifest in their life. Knowing also, it's funny that some of the things on Wikipedia for me are maybe true but outdated. Things that were the thing to look at 10 years ago, 8 years ago, 15, whatever it is. And so I always want to ask people from in their own experience, not just who are you? What are you? What do you do? But if somebody is, I'm like, I know that you're a writer. I know that you're an actor. I know that you're a comedian. What else? I don't want to pigeonhole you. I don't want to, just put you in this category box. So really, I guess the answer is kind of I don't do extensive preparation, but I'm just ready to be present with, whatever the person is offering, and then have some questions and ideas prepared to coax someone into offering things if they are not, just as immediately forthcoming as I or many others might be.
Exactly. See, and I can relate to that because for Casually Molly, it's just like how you were talking about journalism earlier, how it's just here's a question and this and that. And I always try to get points and things together. But what people always forget when you're doing stuff like this, and I say that as a generalization to make a point, not to say that anybody listening or Myq Kaplan here producing a podcast forget this, but there is the human element. And there is, the organic conversation, things pop up. There's things I don't even think of. And then you highlight this and you're like, oh, here's a point. And I'm like, oh, I did read that on the website and I forgot about that. And it makes the part of the story and the question more interesting than maybe I could have even imagined. So thank you for sharing that. That was a really beautiful breakdown of how preparation works into it. Just because I know a lot of people, I get messages a lot of time well, what do you do to put a podcast together and stuff? So Myq Kaplan, follow him at Myq Kaplan for any other podcasting advice. But speaking of the human element, I do like to ask this, and then we'll go back to your show and end this out. Sometimes, you have a great career, you have a great resume, but sometimes things do go wrong, maybe at a show, maybe something happens. Was there an experience in your comedy, unless, every show you do is just perfect and you have no issues and no problems. It could even be for the podcast, where something went wrong, but you made it through and you casually came on top.
Thank you for asking. And it's funny that you say, has every show been perfect? Well, the name of the show that I'm touring right now is called Imperfect. And it is in ways, I'm working on perfecting it. But also, of course, the answer is that there are times that things have gone ways that in the moment I might have wished them to go differently. Though after the moment, looking back, I mean, some of those moments that didn't go well may have turned into like the funniest jokes or the best stories, or meaningful memories, or even just like, a couple nights ago, I was sad about something, anxious about something, and right now I don't even remember what it was, because
Right.
it's not what I'm sitting with now. And I mean, I'm doing my best to be present, and it's certainly a lot easier to be present when I'm being present with joy. And it is like a joy to be present. But sometimes, like last night, I was walking home from a couple shows that I had in my neighborhood, and it was hot, and I was wearing, long pants that I was like feeling sweaty, and I was like tired, and I hadn't eaten recently. And I remember getting home and just saying to my girlfriend, like, I'm sweaty and hungry, and I don't know what to do. And she's like, eat something? I was like,
Right.
yeah, but I was like, should I shower first? Should I eat? Whatever and so now I remember here's another element to this story. My good friend, Zach Sherwin, my best friend, he is a fantastic comedian and more. I recommend everyone checking out The Crossword Show, his magnum opus of his life. It's a beautiful thing. Zach and I talk most days, and the other day I was talking to him about something that was causing me some anxiety, which I can say to you now because I'm not in the midst of that anxiety at the time. And he was basically like, Myq, it is totally, of course it's fine to be anxious about this thing. And we kind of now have this joke where I'm like, at the moment I was like, I mean, I'm not saying I'm anxious about it. He's like, oh no, you would never say that you're anxious about it. He's like, because you're not, like, the idea, I feel like, I don't know if this is, I know it's not unique to me, but certainly due to my, my upbringing, my nature, nurture combination, my culture, my family, my existence, like part of the reason that the show is called Imperfect is that I am constantly learning ways that I am not perfect and that I can improve, as a human being, as a partner, in relationships, as a citizen, and that, like, it really feels like, like I was good in school, and sometimes learning that you didn't do something right, or that you, said something hurtful, or didn't realize that you were having an impact on other people in a specific way. Sometimes it's like, oh no, like I failed. I did the wrong thing. It was bad. Like that's not what I meant. And like, it's almost, I listen to a lot of meditation, like teachers.
Me
and,
too. Yeah.
and one of the things I listened to recently, I think it was in this Joseph Goldstein talk, like that the moment that you realize that, and if it wasn't him, he's wonderful, and also whoever said this is wonderful, but I think it was him. The idea is that if you realize you've gotten distracted, if you realize that you've, lost your way for a moment, like we can beat ourselves up over it, or we can be grateful that when we realize that we got distracted, that means that in that moment we are at least present for that realizing, for that noticing, like, oh, I did get distracted. Now I'm focusing on my breath again. And so ideally, any time that let's say, the anxiety that I felt the other day, I'm like, oh, now I'm like grateful for it and to it. And even in that moment where my friend was saying like, it's okay if you're anxious. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I mean, I'll definitely, I know that it's okay to be anxious, but I'm not anxious. And I'll definitely tomorrow admit that yesterday, right now, I was anxious, but right now I'm just not in a place where I can do that. And so all of this, like what people ask sometimes, like, what are your worst show experiences, or is there like a horrible heckle that you got? And sometimes those stories are about like, redemption and catharsis and triumph. Like, I mean, because truly the worst, this is something that I haven't even really thought of specifically, but I'm gonna say, I feel like I'm gonna say this to other people at other times also, but like when people ask for like, what's a heckle story, like, do you ever have like a real bad heckle? Like, really, they want like a good story, they want one with a happy ending, when like the classic ones are just like, yeah, somebody was drunk and was like, I don't like you, and then they got thrown out, and then I did the rest of the show, and I felt a little bad, and but that person's gone now, and I hope they get to see shows that they want to in the future, and that if they have a drinking problem, that they address it, and but the story, like, and I do have like, wonderful, like, I have a story of opening for Casey and the Sunshine Band, and the audience was not there to see me, and so they were not listening. They were talking. It was like maybe 1,000 to 2,000 people in the round. I'm on a rotating stage, outdoors under a tent in Cape Cod, and I'm as I'm rotating, I'm starting a joke to one person who's not listening, and then I turn and I'm like finishing the joke to another, and there's like a little girl giving me a thumbs down, and I'm like, at least that's not yelling, and so this is all super funny to me now, and at the time it was a great challenge. And so, I mean, there's been so many times with my podcast. Like, one time I remember having a beautiful conversation with, I believe it was I think it was Matt Diffie, who's a New Yorker cartoonist, a great artist, a funny guy. And I remember we had a conversation, I think, in his hotel room, and it was such a beautiful conversation. And then afterwards, I realized it didn't record, or it didn't.
That's the worst feeling. I know. Yeah.
And I was like, oh no, we just had a meaningful connection in the moment that no one can hear. All that happened was two humans connected. Oh no, and I remember, like, I don't remember everything that we said, and I think I did have him on the podcast again eventually, and and I don't think we tried to like recreate, and then you said this, and then this, and this, like, let's try to capture that magic after the moment. But like, those things do happen, and like, until you asked this, like, I wasn't thinking about that podcast conversation that was lost. Like, when it's happening, it feels like the biggest thing. I mean, because when it's happening, it's the only thing. And also, it's valuable for me to remember that everything comes and everything goes. A thing that I didn't make that up, but just a Myq Kaplan original. Things change. I think there is. I forget the exact Zen master or Buddhist teacher that said this, but I just heard, I think, again, Joseph Goldstein share about this. It was maybe Suzuki Roshi, maybe Shunryu Suzuki. I forget. I think Suzuki was involved in this guy's name, but somebody asked a Buddhist, a great Buddhist teacher, like, can you sum up, like, the Buddha said like 84,000 things. Can you like sort of sum it up in like one? Can you encapsulate it? And he was like, things change. Next question. And like, so it's such a valuable thing to remember. That's hard to remember because while things are happening, like while a show isn't going well, or while a podcast didn't record, or while an anxiety is the thing that's present, or while there is hunger or sweatiness or tiredness or thirst or crankiness or anger or whatever those things are, like those are the things that's what's happening. So it feels like the only thing that will ever be, but it's always valuable for me to remember that every thought I've ever had has gone away. Every emotion that I've ever experienced, except for what I'm experiencing right now, like has passed. And so I don't know if this answers your question exactly, but yeah, sometimes shows don't go well.
Yeah. No, that is actually one of my favorite responses. And I don't ask it all the time, but I really appreciate you saying that, just because in the moment, right? Like you're like, oh no, like this happened. But then sometimes, like, there was one time it happened here too, where I had a great conversation with somebody who I eventually had back on the podcast. And the second time was almost even better than the first time we did it. So I was kind of like, okay, I was like, I don't really know like what fate is. And I listen to a lot of meditation podcasts and stuff too. So I'm like listening to like the Buddhist I don't even know how to interpret it, but I'm like, maybe this was meant to happen, where I'm like, oh, you know what? Maybe that was trash. It was we got to connect, but now this is something that should be shared. So I understand, like, things happen. And I think, just sometimes you have to be like, all right, like, you can't be like, oh, swing one way or the other here. You just have to be like, what am I going to get through? How am I going to get through this right here, right now? Which you've done great on this podcast, by the way. Taking all my punching, all my questions, all these like nitty gritty. I mean, U.S. weekly tabloids. I mean, they're going to come right at us here. But speaking of taking all the punches, I really appreciate your time. We asked the last question I always ask, which almost sounds a little bit like a cliche, but I find out a lot of interesting things from guests by asking this question. You've given a lot of great input about comedy and your resume and everything, and that's wonderful. Just to kind of close everything out, what is some casual advice that you would give maybe to yourself long ago that now? We've talked about learning. We're great fans of it. It's gonna, head and heart. But what is something that you feel like people would walk away with that you felt was maybe important, maybe that you've learned over time?
Sure. That's there's so many things. Like I also feel like, the thing that you said about the idea of like the way things went, sort of being meant to be, like, I believe in fate only looking backwards necessarily. Like, if that makes sense, that everything that did happen, like, happened the way that it did. And in this incarnation, in this dimension, in this reality, in this universe, that's the only way that it could have happened, because there's this logical path of everything everything does happen for a reason. It's not, that doesn't necessarily help when, like, well, why did this bad thing happen? Why did this painful thing happen? Why did well, for a reason, probably because, why did this suffering happen? Well, probably because of that suffering. Why did this person hurt that person? Well, because that person was hurt by that person. Or why, ultimately going all the way back, in a Buddhist paradigm to beginningless time. And the good news about in the Buddhist paradigm is that, like, there is the Four Noble Truths are, there is suffering, there is the cause of suffering, then there is, and if those are the only two that then like, don't leave that class early like I did once. Like, oh well, suffering and the cause of suffering. Got to go to a show anyway. Time to do comedy. The third one is the cessation of suffering, and then the fourth, I believe, is the path to the cessation of suffering, and that is so that makes sense to me. That resonates. That is a possibility. Like I haven't yet experienced in this lifetime, or I think if I'd experienced it in other lifetimes, then it would. I would reap the benefits in this one as well. But so I haven't yet experienced the cessation of suffering, but the concept that there is suffering and that there is a potential path to its cessation, which is like sort of like, my Buddhism understanding in a nutshell is like the goal is to increase happiness and decrease suffering for sentient beings. And I like, this is a nice definition of love and compassion that I learned recently, that the Buddhist definition of love, I believe, is when you love someone, you wish for them to increase happiness. And the definition of compassion is when you are compassionate, you wish for someone's suffering to decrease. So suffering decrease, happiness increase. And I guess one other quote that I like that sort of ties in with this, that if I heard it earlier, who knows if my life would be different, but I couldn't have because I didn't. But from The Prophet by Khalil Gibran.
Yes, I have that book. Okay, sorry, continue.
Yeah.
Not to get so excited about this.
Oh, no,
yes.
I recommend everyone either have it or read it.
Yes.
Learn it, take it in. The line from it that sticks with me the most is, the deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. And that doesn't mean go out looking for sorrow. Like there'll be plenty. And it doesn't mean that every sorrow necessarily like results in, some commensurate amount of joy. But that, this is sort of a theme of what we've been talking about, that if something, like, think about any, if you've experienced joy in your life, then joy is possible. If you've experienced suffering in your life that is no longer present, if there's any suffering that ever existed that isn't there anymore, then that's possible. That, all these things are impermanent. in ways. And yeah, I guess I would have, I guess my advice to myself would have been to like, hey, start learning about Buddhism whenever you want to. But like those are sort of like the big truths, like the headlines, and it's important to read the articles as well, and not just know the slogans, but also do the practice of self-compassion and compassion for others. I feel like there's a joke on the album AKA that I put out last year where I talk about an epiphany that I had of essentially to be nice. And a friend asked me, he's like, that's your epiphany? Like, we know that, that's, and I don't want to spoil everything for you. Check out AKA. Come to the Gaslight, July 16th. And
July
also,
16th? Yeah.
That's right. That's the hype person I'm talking about. And also my album AKA is my most recent album, and I'm the happiest with it and proudest of it. I love all my albums are my children, and this one is the oldest and wisest of them.
Yes.
It's actually the newest and freshest, but I was the most experienced comedian and me when I created it in the past couple of years. And but the point is that even the things that we know are true and kind and good for us and good for the world. They're not always the easiest to remember. They're not always the easiest to implement, to apply, to practice. And so that is the thing that I guess I would offer to myself and anyone who wants, is to do our best to remember to breathe, to not beat ourselves up, to be kind. If there are things that we wish we didn't do or that didn't happen, like what can we do better in the future? How can we use regret as fuel for positive change moving forward? How can we make amends and atone and forgive ourselves or others? How can we do our best to be loving to all? And so I guess there are things that you hear them all the time. You can see them on Instagram all the time. You can see them on bumper stickers. You can but sometimes just seeing it, just knowing the words, a lesson that I did learn that I would re-emphasize.
Okay.
When I was in maybe junior, senior year of high school, I took a class, AP history, and I'd always done well in school, but history was my least favorite and my worst subject. And my first assignment in that class, I wrote all the information. I was everything that I'd memorized. That was what history used to be, just memorizing facts, dates, information, happenings. But there was no analysis, no concepts. And so I got a D on the assignment, and the teacher was like, "This is full of facts, but no concepts." And I feel that's the idea similarly of yeah, I know the thing. Be kind to myself, of course. Oh, I'm so stupid. Of course, I forgot to be kind to myself. Oh God. And yeah. And so if you're, yelling at yourself and beating yourself up about not beating yourself up, it's hopefully can be funny, and it's not necessarily easy to get out of this. This is one of it's the work. It's the hard thing. But to know, so I would hopefully let myself know concepts and applications, not just headlines. Read the article, immerse yourself in the material, do the work. Oh, and start meditating sooner. Young me, you'll get things out of meditating. Stop watching garbage TV. Just eliminate one TV show and meditate. Just you can't take in everything. So what is it that you want to spend your time doing? And I hope the answer is, being kind to yourself and creating art, and keep making music. And I guess you asked for one. I gave a lot.
Yes, we got all the points though, which is what I really appreciate. Absolutely. That was great. I love meditation. I feel like I used to kind of look down on it, to be honest, how am I going to sit still and do? It's changed my whole life. So I agree with that advice. Sounds good to me. Well, Myq, this has been wonderful. Thank you very much for coming on. I feel like I've learned so much about you, and I hope our listeners feel the same way. If you would like to connect and learn more about Myq Kaplan, and you are in the St. Louis area, or you want to make a road trip, check him out this Friday, July 16th, 8 p.m. It is going to be at the Gaslight Theatre, staple to St. Louis. We got Gail Hollander, who's been a friend and guest of the podcast. He's going to be hosting. Emily Hickner, who's a local favorite here. She will be featuring. And of course, your headliner, Myq Kaplan. He's going to be doing all the stuff, AKA comedian Myq Kaplan. Anyway, so we always say, what are you going to casually do now that the podcast is over?
Oh, I guess I'm going to casually use the restroom because I've been casually drinking lots of fluids for the entirety of this. But yeah, I hope does that work?
Yeah. Cheers. We're going to the restroom. We've got the fluids and the water. July 16th, 8 p.m. Bye, everybody. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you.